In 1944, while most of the world was still on fire, 44 countries met in a quiet hotel in New Hampshire. Outside, World War II was tearing cities apart. Inside, men in suits were quietly deciding who would control money after the smoke cleared. That meeting would help make the United States unimaginably rich. Not just richer than Europe, not just richer than Asia, richer than everyone. And the strange part, America didn't become wealthy by saving more than everyone else. It became wealthy by building a system where the entire world needed its money. That matters right now. Because when people argue about US debt, dollar dominance, trade deficits, or why America can print money without collapsing, they're arguing about the same machine built decades ago. So how did it happen? Let's start before the dominance, before Wall Street, before Silicon Valley. In 1900, the United States was still catching up to Europe. Britain controlled global trade. The British pound was the world's reserve currency. If you wanted to trade internationally, you used London banks. Then 2 world wars happened. Europe burned twice. Factories were destroyed. Infrastructure flattened. Governments bankrupt. The US mainland untouched between 1914 and 1945. While Europe spent money on bombs, America built factories. While others destroyed capital, America accumulated it. By the end of World War II, the United States produced roughly half of the world's industrial output. Half, one country, it held about 2/3 of the world's gold reserves. If money was backed by gold, America effectively owned the money. That 1944 meeting in New Hampshire created the Bretton Woods system. The US dollar would be tied to gold. Other countries would tie their currencies to the dollar. So instead of the world trusting gold directly, they trusted the dollar. And since America had most of the gold, that trust wasn't crazy. But here's where the quiet genius begins. After the war, Europe and Japan were broke. They needed rebuilding. The United States could have demanded repayment in gold or hard assets. Instead, it did something counterintuitive. It loaned them dollars. Through programs like the Marshall Plan, the US sent billions overseas. On paper, that looked generous, almost charitable. But those dollars didn't disappear. They circulated globally. Countries used them to trade oil, to buy goods, to settle debts. The dollar became the oxygen of global trade. And once everyone depends on your currency, you gain something more powerful than gold. You gain demand. In 1971, the system cracked. The US had printed more dollars than it had gold. Foreign governments started asking to convert dollars into gold. President Richard Nixon closed the gold window. No more gold backing. In theory, this should have ended dollar dominance. It didn't. Because by then, the dollar wasn't backed by gold. It was backed by habit, by contracts, by oil. Here's the uncomfortable math. Oil is priced globally in dollars. If Japan wants oil from Saudi Arabia, it needs dollars. If Germany wants oil, dollars. If India wants oil, dollars. So every country holds dollar reserves. That creates constant demand for US currency. Now imagine you are the United States government. You need to borrow money. You issue treasury bonds. Who buys them? Foreign governments, central banks, global investors, because they need dollar assets to store their reserves. So the US can run trade deficits. It can import more than it exports. It can spend more than it taxes. And instead of collapsing, the rest of the world finances it. That sounds absurd. Because it is. America sends paper. The world sends goods. Cars from Germany. Electronics from Asia. Clothes from everywhere. And in exchange, dollar-denominated debt. This is sometimes called the exorbitant privilege. And it's not just a slogan. It's arithmetic. When the US runs a trade deficit, dollars flow overseas. Those dollars don't stay under mattresses. They return as investments into US stocks, real estate, and government bonds. The money leaves, then it comes back, like a boomerang that pays interest. But currency dominance alone doesn't explain everything. There's another layer, scale. The United States built the largest unified consumer market on earth. 50 states, one currency, one legal system, massive internal trade. Compare that to Europe, fragmented by language and regulation for much of the 20th century, or developing nations with unstable institutions. In America, a company could scale nationally before going global. Railroads, automobiles, retail chains, tech platforms. When the interstate highway system was built in the 1950s, it wasn't just infrastructure, it was an economic weapon. It reduced transportation costs across an entire continent-sized economy. Then came innovation cycles. The US dominated automobiles with companies like Ford and General Motors, then aerospace, then computing, then the internet, then software. Each wave created high-margin industries. But here's the subtle part: America didn't just build companies. It built capital markets. Wall Street isn't powerful because it's flashy. It's powerful because it allocates enormous pools of global savings into American firms. If you are a pension fund in Norway, a sovereign wealth fund in the Middle East, or an insurance company in Japan, you likely own US equities, because US markets are deep, liquid, transparent relative to alternatives. Capital flows to safety and scale, and over time that compounds. There's irony here: Americans often worry about foreign ownership. But foreign capital pouring into US assets pushes up stock prices and lowers borrowing costs. It makes American households feel wealthier. Then there's immigration. For over a century, the US absorbed talent from everywhere. Scientists fleeing war, engineers seeking opportunity, entrepreneurs chasing scale. Many of the biggest American companies were founded or co-founded by immigrants or their children. That isn't sentiment. It's math. Talent density drives innovation. Add cheap energy into the equation. The US is rich in natural resources. Oil, natural gas, farmland, energy independence in recent years reduced vulnerability to external shocks. Now step back: currency dominance, trade deficits financed externally, deep capital markets, massive internal market, innovation waves, resource abundance, layered together, they form a system. But systems have trade-offs. The same dollar strength that makes imports cheap can hollow out manufacturing regions. If your currency is the global reserve, it tends to stay strong. A strong currency makes exports less competitive. So while Wall Street booms, certain industrial towns shrink. That tension still shapes politics today. And then there's debt. The US national debt is enormous, trillions upon trillions. In another country, that might trigger a currency crisis. But because the dollar is the global reserve, demand for US treasuries remains high. So the US can borrow at lower interest rates than many nations with far less debt. It feels almost unfair until it isn't. Because reserve currency status depends on trust. Trust in institutions, trust in rule of law, trust that the political system, messy as it is, will honor contracts. If that trust erodes, the privilege erodes. We've seen hints of strain. Countries discussing alternative payment systems, central banks diversifying reserves, digital currencies emerging. None have replaced the dollar. Yet, history has a quiet lesson here. Before the dollar, it was the British pound. Before the pound, other currencies. Reserve currencies change. Slowly, then suddenly. So how did the United States get so rich? It won wars without being destroyed. It lent instead of demanded. It turned its currency into global infrastructure. It built the deepest capital markets in history. It attracted talent at scale, and it convinced the world to hold its debt as a safe asset. Wealth at this level isn't about frugality. It's about architecture. The architecture of money, of trade, of trust, and right now that architecture still tilts in America's favor. But here's the uncomfortable question. If the system that made the United States rich depends on the rest of the world believing in it, what happens if belief fades? Not overnight, not dramatically, just gradually, because empires rarely announce their decline. They just wake up one day and realize the system no longer bends around them, and by then the math looks very different.